"Sir, why did you secretly pay my mother's hospital bills?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. The man across the desk met her gaze, calm, unreadable. Ivy's pulse pounded. She had imagined outrage, denial, anything but this silence. Then, finally, he spoke. "Does it matter?" A chill ran down her spine. Of course, it mattered. Someone had erased a debt that should have taken her a lifetime to repay. And that someone was him, a man she had never met. Or so she thought. Because the way he looked at her. It wasn't the gaze of a stranger. Stay. The truth is far from simple. The fluorescent lights of St. Vincent Medical Center buzzed softly, casting a pale glow over the cold, sterile hallways. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, mixing with the distant hum of heart monitors and muffled conversations between nurses. Ivy Quinn tightened her grip on the worn leather strap of her purse, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her entire body ached from exhaustion, double shifts at the diner, long nights at the bookstore, and the weight of an impossible debt pressing against her chest like a boulder she could never move. $164,000. That was the number that haunted her, creeping into every waking thought and sleepless night. She quickened her pace as she neared her mother's hospital room. Margaret Maggie Quinn, once a woman full of life and laughter, now lay resting under the dim glow of a bedside lamp. Her face, though paler than Ivy remembered, carried the same warmth, the same quiet strength that had held their small family together for years. Ivy stepped closer, brushing a few strands of silver-threaded hair from Maggie's forehead. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was oddly soothing. Just a few weeks ago, her mother had been fighting for her life, her heart giving out without warning. The emergency surgery had saved her, but it had also buried Ivy under a mountain of medical debt she had no way of climbing. "Meja." Maggie's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Ivy forced a smile, squeezing her mother's frail hand. "Hey, Mama. How are you feeling?" Maggie exhaled a tired breath, her dark eyes filled with quiet affection. "Like someone cracked open my chest and rearranged my insides." Ivy let out a soft chuckle, despite the lump forming in her throat. "Yeah, well, technically, they did." Maggie tried to smile, but winced slightly, the movement sending a flicker of pain across her face. Ivy's stomach twisted. No matter how strong her mother tried to be, there was no denying the toll the surgery had taken on her. "You shouldn't be here so late, Meja." "You work too much," Maggie murmured, her fingers weakly squeezing Ivy's. "I can handle it," Ivy said quickly. She had to. There was no other option. Maggie sighed, her eyes searching Ivy's face. "You don't have to do this alone." But she did. Ivy swallowed down the knot of emotions threatening to rise, and forced herself to sound steady. "Get some rest, Mama. I'll be back soon." She kissed Maggie's forehead, lingering for just a second longer before stepping back. With one last glance at her mother, her reason for fighting, Ivy turned and walked toward the billing department. The front desk was quieter than usual, with only a few tired nurses finishing their paperwork. Ivy approached hesitantly, her stomach coiling with dread. She had prepared herself for another impossible conversation, another reminder of how much she owed. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes and a name tag that read Janet, glanced up with a polite, but tired smile. "Hi, I wanted to check on my mother's hospital bill." "Margaret Quinn," Ivy said, her voice steady despite the anxiety curling in her stomach. Janet typed into the computer, nodding slightly. "Give me just a moment, hun." Ivy drummed her fingers against the desk, her nerves frayed. She already knew what she would hear, the same overwhelming number, the same suffocating reality. Maybe they could adjust the payment plan, maybe she could beg for more time. "Oh," Janet murmured, her brows knitting together. Ivy's stomach dropped. O was never good. Is something wrong? Janet blinked at the screen, then looked up. No, actually. It's just. She hesitated, double-checking the monitor. The bill's been paid. In full. Ivy felt like she'd been hit by a freight train. I'm sorry, what? Paid. As in, completely covered. Zero balance. A sharp laugh bubbled in Ivy's throat, but it never escaped. This had to be a mistake. Maybe Janet had pulled up the wrong account. That's not possible, Ivy said, shaking her head. I haven't, there's no way. Janet turned the screen slightly toward her, as if to prove she wasn't making it up. Sure enough, where there should have been a devastating six-figure balance, there was nothing. Just the word paid in bold capital letters. Ivy's knees went weak. Who? Her voice barely came out. Janet gave her a small, apologetic smile. An anonymous donor. The payment was made this morning. Ivy stared at her, disbelief crashing through her like a tidal wave. Someone, some stranger, had wiped out the debt she had been breaking herself to pay. Just like that. But why? And more importantly, who? The bell above the door chimed. Ivy barely looked up. Morning rush was in full swing, and she was too busy pouring coffee for Mr. Henderson, a trucker who had been coming to Maplewood Diner for as long as she could remember. But then the room shifted. A hush fell over the usual chatter, and even the clatter of silverware seemed to pause. Something, or someone, had just changed the atmosphere. She turned her head. And everything stopped. A man stepped inside, and from the way the diner reacted, it was as if a movie star had walked in. But he wasn't an actor. He was something far more dangerous. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a sleek black suit that looked both effortless and meticulously tailored, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that made people move out of his way without realizing they had done so. His dark hair was neatly styled, not a strand out of place, and his face was striking, sharp jawline, high cheekbones, piercing gray eyes that scanned the room like he was assessing every single person inside. Whispers started almost immediately. No way. That's him, right? Knox Wilder. The billionaire. What the hell is he doing here? Ivy's stomach twisted. Knox Wilder. Even she knew his name. Everyone did. CEO of Wilderfield Corporation, one of the largest and most powerful conglomerates in the state. His company had its hands in everything: real estate, finance, tech startups. He was the kind of man whose name appeared in Forbes, the kind whose face graced the covers of business magazines with headlines like, "The King of Wall Street," and "How One Man Built an Empire Before 35. So what the hell was he doing in her diner? Ivy quickly turned away, pretending to be busy wiping down the counter. She'd served all kinds of people before, truckers, students, families, but never someone like him. He wasn't supposed to be here. This place was for cheap coffee and greasy breakfast plates, not multi-million-dollar business moguls. Yet, when she finally glanced back, he was still standing there. Watching her. Ivy swallowed, grabbed a menu, and did what she always did: she worked. She approached him with her best polite, indifferent waitress smile. "Morning, sir. Table for one." Knox's gaze locked onto hers. For a split second, something flickered in his expression: recognition. Interest. It was gone before she could make sense of it. "Yes," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "A booth, if possible." Ivy nodded and led him to the best seat in the house, the corner booth with a full view of the diner. He sat down without a word, placing his phone face down on the table. "Can I get you some coffee to start?" she asked, gripping her notepad a little too tightly. Black. She nodded again and walked away, forcing herself to breathe. But she could feel his eyes on her. As the morning rush continued, she did everything in her power to ignore him. But it was impossible. Knox Wilder wasn't just here, he was watching. Every time she passed his table, she felt his gaze tracking her movements. It wasn't predatory, nor was it overly curious. It was calculated. And it unsettled her. Why her? Why now? Then she remembered the hospital bill. Ivy nearly dropped a plate as the realization hit her like a freight train. The anonymous donor. The sudden, unexplained payment that had wiped out her mother's crushing debt. Could it be him? Her pulse quickened as she stole another glance at him. His wealth was undeniable. $164,000 was pocket change to a man like Knox Wilder. If he had wanted to pay off the debt, he could have done it with the push of a button. But why? Ivy's stomach twisted. Was this some kind of power move? A game? Or worse? Did he know something about her that she didn't? She needed answers. When his order was ready, she set the plate in front of him and forced herself to speak. Have you decided if you'd like anything else? Knox took a sip of his coffee before answering. No, this will do. His voice was even, but there was something deliberate in the way he spoke. As if every word was carefully chosen. Ivy hesitated, then decided to push her luck. I have to ask. Why are you here? Knox didn't blink. Is there a reason I shouldn't be? It's just. People like you don't usually eat at places like this. A faint smirk touched his lips. People like me. Ivy crossed her arms. Billionaires. CEOs. People who probably have personal chefs and 5-star restaurants at their disposal. Knox leaned back, studying her. I wanted something different today. It wasn't a lie. But it also wasn't the whole truth. Ivy felt frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He was toying with her, deflecting. And then came the tip. When he finally finished, he slid the check toward her. The bill. $16. The tip. A crisp $100 bill. Ivy's breath hitched. She stared at the money, then at him. Sir, I think you might have. It's yours, he interrupted smoothly. Ivy narrowed her eyes. That's a lot for breakfast. A slow, amused smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Then consider it an investment. Her stomach tightened. Investment in what? His grey eyes gleamed with something unreadable. You? Ivy's heart pounded. The hospital bill. The strange, calculated way he watched her. And now this. It wasn't a coincidence. She had been right to suspect him. Knox Wilder knew something. And she was going to find out what it was. Ivy stood frozen in front of the gleaming glass tower of Wilder Field Corporation, her pulse pounding in her ears. The building was massive, its exterior reflecting the late afternoon sunlight in sharp, dazzling angles. It loomed over her, a testament to the empire Knox Wilder had built. People in perfectly tailored suits moved past her with purpose, their expressions unreadable, their conversations clipped and efficient. She swallowed hard. Everything about this place told her she didn't belong. But today, she didn't care. Her mother's hospital bill, $164,000, had vanished overnight. A mystery benefactor had paid it in full, and now, after meeting him, she had a name. Knox Wilder. It wasn't a coincidence. She took a steadying breath and stepped inside. The lobby was a world of polished marble and cold efficiency. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. A massive chandelier cast golden light over the reception desk, where a woman in a sleek black dress sat, tapping away at a keyboard. Ivy approached, forcing her voice to stay firm. "I need to see Knox Wilder." The receptionist didn't even glance up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important." Now, the woman looked at her, just for a second, a flicker of mild annoyance crossing her perfectly composed features. "Mr. Wilder doesn't take unannounced visitors." Ivy clenched her fists. "Tell him it's Ivy Quinn." The receptionist's fingers hovered over her keyboard. That name meant something. Ivy saw it in the brief hesitation, the slight narrowing of her eyes. A moment later, the woman pressed a button on her headset. "Miss Quinn is here to see Mr. Wilder." Silence. Ivy held her breath. Then, the answer came through. "Send her up." Her stomach twisted. She hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. The 38th floor was eerily quiet. Ivy stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble. A long, dimly lit hallway stretched before her, leading to a pair of heavy glass doors with Knox Wilder emblazoned in silver lettering. A man in a dark suit, security, judging by his earpiece, pushed the doors open for her. She stepped inside. Knox sat behind a massive black desk, floor-to-ceiling windows behind him revealing the sprawling city skyline. He looked completely at ease, as if he had been expecting her. "Miss Quinn," he said, his voice smooth, unreadable. "Please, have a seat." Ivy didn't move. Her heart was hammering, but she refused to let it show. "You paid my mother's hospital bills." The words came out sharper than she intended. Knox didn't blink. "I did." No hesitation. No denial. Ivy clenched her fists. "Why?" Knox exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters," she snapped. "People like you don't just throw that kind of money at strangers for no reason." A flicker of something crossed his face, but it was gone before she could place it. "It wasn't a donation," he said evenly. "It was a debt." Ivy's stomach tightened. "A debt?" Knox's grey eyes met hers. "Not yours. Mine." A chill ran down her spine. "To my mother." A beat of silence. Then, "Yes." Ivy's breath hitched. Nothing about this made sense. "That's not an answer," she said, her voice dangerously low. Knox's jaw tightened slightly. "It's the only one I can give you." Ivy let out a bitter laugh. "Right? So I'm just supposed to accept that a billionaire owes my mother something so massive that he wipes out a six-figure hospital bill without a second thought?" Knox didn't respond. That silence told her more than words ever could. He was hiding something. And she was going to find out what it was. Ivy sat at her kitchen table, staring at the unopened laptop in front of her. The air in the small apartment was thick with tension, the kind that wrapped around her chest and refused to let go. Knox Wilder was hiding something. And she was done waiting for him to tell her what it was. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the lid, the glow of the screen casting a cold light against her tired face. She typed quickly, searching for any connection between Margaret Quinn and Knox Wilder. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. Frustration burned in her chest. There had to be something. People didn't just erase debts out of obligation, not people like Knox. Then she thought of something. She deleted the search and typed in a different name. Robert Wilder. Knox's father. The man who had built the Wilderfield empire before passing it on to his son. Hundreds of results flooded the screen, articles, interviews, photos. Ivy scrolled past the usual headlines about his business ventures, his wealth, his legacy. But then, a scandal. The headline made her breath catch. Robert Wilder's secret affairs, the women left behind. Her hands tightened into fists as she clicked the link. The article detailed multiple affairs Robert Wilder had been involved in over the years, rumors of women, hidden relationships, whispered secrets that had followed him until the day he died. And then, her heart nearly stopped. Margaret Quinn. Her mother's name was right there, buried in the middle of a paragraph, but it may as well have been flashing in bold letters. Ivy's vision blurred as she read. Margaret, Maggie Quinn, a former artist and gallery assistant, was rumored to have been involved with Robert Wilder during the late 1990s. Sources close to Quinn claim she had no knowledge of Wilder's marriage at the time. Upon discovering the truth, she allegedly ended the relationship immediately and disappeared from the social circles she had once frequented. Ivy's breath came in short, uneven gasps. Her mother had been with Knox's father. This couldn't be real. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers barely able to dial the number. It rang once. Twice. Ivy. Her mother's voice was groggy, thick with sleep. Ivy's grip tightened. Mama? I need you to tell me the truth. A pause. What are you talking about, Meja? Ivy swallowed hard. Did you know Robert Wilder? Silence. A long, painful silence that stretched between them like a chasm. And then, finally. Where did you hear that name? Her mother's voice was quiet. Shaken. Ivy's pulse pounded in her ears. So it's true. Margaret exhaled sharply. Ivy, listen to me. Why didn't you ever tell me? Her voice cracked. Because it didn't matter. Ivy let out a bitter laugh. Didn't matter. Mom, Knox Wilder just paid off your entire hospital bill. That man's father was. She couldn't even finish the sentence. It was a mistake, Margaret whispered. One I tried to erase. Ivy felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. Tell me everything. A heavy sigh. Then, finally. I didn't know he was married. Ivy squeezed her eyes shut. I met Robert years ago. I was young. He was charming, powerful. And I thought he cared about me. A bitter laugh. I was a fool. When I found out the truth, I left. I cut him off. And Knox. Margaret hesitated. I never knew him. He was just a boy back then. Ivy's head spun. Knox had to know. That's why he had paid the bill. But what did he really want? And what the hell did this make them now? Ivy barely slept that night. She sat on her couch, the dim glow of her laptop screen flickering in the darkness. Her mother's words echoed in her head, mixing with the relentless pounding of her own heartbeat. I didn't know he was married. When I found out the truth, I left. I cut him off. Her mother had been one of Robert Wilder's affairs. Which meant that Knox. She still didn't know what that meant. What she did know was that Knox had lied to her. He had made it seem like paying her mother's hospital bill was nothing more than repaying a debt. But it wasn't. It was connected to something bigger, something darker. And she was going to find out what. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed the words. Catherine Wilder. Knox's mother. Countless articles popped up. At first, they were the usual headlines, photos of a strikingly beautiful woman in glamorous gowns, smiling beside Robert Wilder at charity events. But then, as she scrolled further, the headlines changed. Tragedy in the Wilder family. Catherine Wilder found dead in her estate. Ivy's breath caught. She clicked on the article. Catherine Wilder, wife of billionaire Robert Wilder, found dead in her home. June 12, 1998, Catherine Wilder, wife of business mogul Robert Wilder, was found deceased in the master bedroom of their estate late last night. Authorities have confirmed the cause of death as self-inflicted. Sources close to the family claim that Wilder had been battling severe depression for years. The tragedy comes amid rumors of her husband's numerous extramarital affairs, though no official statements have been made regarding these allegations. Ivy's hands clenched into fists. Knox's mother had killed herself. She scrolled further, scanning for more details. Friends describe Catherine as a devoted mother, but sources claim she became increasingly withdrawn in the months leading up to her death. Those close to the family suggest that she was aware of Robert Wilder's infidelities, which may have contributed to her decline. Ivy swallowed hard. She tried to picture it, Catherine, a woman trapped in a world of wealth and deception, forced to watch as her husband paraded from one affair to another. The pain, the humiliation. And then, one day, it had become too much. Her heart ached as she imagined a young Knox in that house. A boy who had woken up one morning to find his mother gone. She clicked on another article. Knox Wilder orphaned by tragedy, the billionaire's childhood of loss. Orphaned. Ivy's throat tightened. Knox hadn't just lost his mother, he had lost her to the very thing his father had done. And his father, Robert Wilder, had moved on. There were more affairs. More scandals. More women. As if nothing had happened. Knox had been just a child when his mother died. Left alone in a house filled with ghosts. Left to grow up under the shadow of a man who had destroyed everything. Ivy stared at the screen, her pulse pounding. This wasn't just about a hospital bill. This was about Knox's past. His pain. His revenge. And somehow, her mother was part of it. Ivy sat in stunned silence, gripping her phone so tightly that her fingers ached. Her mother's voice had always been a source of comfort, a steady presence in her chaotic world. But tonight, there was something fragile in it, something raw and unspoken, like an old wound being torn open. "I didn't want you to know," Margaret whispered. "Know what?" Ivy's voice came out hoarse. "That I went back. Not for Robert. For Knox." Ivy's breath caught. "You knew him," she said slowly. "When he was a child." Margaret exhaled, and in that single breath, Ivy heard the weight of years of silence. "He was just a little boy, Major." A pause. "And he had no one." Ivy shut her eyes, trying to process what she was hearing. Her mother, the woman who had always kept her past locked away, hadn't just been involved with Robert Wilder. She had gone back. Not for love. Not for second chances. For a child. "Mom?" "Start from the beginning." Margaret hesitated. Then, finally, she spoke. 1998. The Wilder estate was a place of cold luxury. Every inch of it was designed to impress, but beneath the chandeliers and marble floors, the house felt hollow. Margaret had never intended to return. But when she heard about Catherine Wilder's death, she couldn't ignore it. She hadn't known Catherine personally, only that she had been the elegant, tragic figure behind Robert's fortune. A woman who had suffered in silence until she couldn't anymore. Margaret could have turned away. She should have. But then, she saw him. A little boy with piercing grey eyes, standing in the shadows of a house too big for him. Knox Wilder was only 6 years old. And he was utterly alone. Robert had no interest in parenting. He was too busy with his business deals, his mistresses, his carefully curated public image. He hired nannies, housekeepers, anyone to keep his son out of sight, out of mind. But a child couldn't be ignored forever. Margaret had returned, at first just to check in. to make sure he was being cared for. But the moment she looked into that little boy's haunted eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. "He wouldn't talk at first," Margaret murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "He wouldn't even look at me." Ivy pictured it, her mother kneeling in front of a quiet, broken child, trying to reach him. "But I kept coming back. I made sure he ate, made sure he had someone to talk to. I read to him at night when no one else would. And slowly, he let me in." Ivy's throat tightened. "You loved him," she whispered. "I did." A deep ache settled in Ivy's chest. Margaret had been there. She had stayed when no one else did. But if that was true, then why didn't you take him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret let out a shaky breath. "Because Robert wouldn't let me." Ivy felt rage coil in her stomach. "He didn't care about him." "No," Margaret agreed. "But he cared about control. Robert Wilder hadn't wanted his son, but he damn well wasn't going to let a former mistress take him either. Knox was a Wilder, and that meant he belonged to Robert, whether he wanted him or not." "I tried, Ivy," Margaret said softly. "I fought for him. But Robert had power, lawyers, connections. There was nothing I could do." Ivy felt sick. "So what happened?" Her mother's voice broke. "He sent Knox away." Ivy shut her eyes. "Boarding schools at first. Then foster homes. Anywhere far enough that he wouldn't be Robert Wilder's problem anymore." She could barely breathe. Knox, the man who now stood at the top of the world, had once been a child discarded by his own father. "And you?" Ivy whispered. Margaret's breath hitched. "I tried to find him. But by the time I did, it was too late." Ivy sat in silence, her mind spinning. Her mother had been the only person who had ever fought for Knox. And now, decades later, he had repaid that debt the only way he knew how. But what did it mean for them now? Knox hadn't told her any of this. Why? And more importantly, what did he want from her? Knox had spent years mastering the art of control. In the boardroom, in negotiations, in every aspect of his life, he dictated the terms. He decided what people knew about him, what parts of himself he allowed them to see. But her, Ivy Quinn, she was unraveling everything. It had started with curiosity. A fleeting thought when he first saw her at the diner. Something about her had felt familiar. Not in the way he recognized his competitors, or the countless socialites he had encountered. No, this was something deeper. A pull he couldn't explain. And then, the more he observed her, the more the pieces started fitting together. The way she furrowed her brows when she was lost in thought. The way she spoke, gentle, yet firm. The fire in her eyes when she was angry. He had seen all of this before. Not in her, but in someone else. Someone who had once meant everything to him. Knox had been 6 years old when Margaret Quinn stepped into his life. A woman with warm brown eyes and a voice that soothed the nightmares that lurked in the corners of his mind. She hadn't pitied him like the other adults did. She hadn't whispered about how tragic his life was, hadn't treated him like some broken thing to be fixed. She had simply been there. She had read to him at night when the house was too big and too empty. She had bandaged his scrapes when no one else had noticed. She had taught him that not everyone left. Until she did. He never forgot her. Even after his father had sent him away. Even after he had been passed from one cold, unfamiliar place to another. Margaret Quinn had been the only real sense of home he had ever known. And now, standing before him, was her daughter. Knox had been so careful not to let his past control him. But as he sat in his office, staring at Ivy, the sharpness of her features, the intensity in her eyes. Something inside him cracked. She looked just like Margaret. The realization hit him so hard it was almost visceral. His entire body went still. Ivy must have noticed the shift in his expression, because she frowned, her arms crossing in clear suspicion. "What?" she asked. Knox didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His mind was spinning, dragging him back to memories he had buried deep, memories of a woman who had once held his hand and told him he wasn't alone. You remind me of someone," he finally murmured, his voice quieter than he intended. Ivy's eyes narrowed. "That's not an answer." Knox exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. His heart was pounding in a way that was unfamiliar, and for once, he didn't know how to steady it. "Your mother," he said at last. "Margaret Quinn." Ivy's breath caught. A storm of emotions flickered across her face, shock, confusion, something dangerously close to realization. "You knew her." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Knox let out a bitter chuckle. "She saved me." Silence stretched between them. Ivy was the first to break it. "That's why you paid the hospital bill." Knox met her gaze. "Yes." The moment the word left his lips, something between them shifted. Ivy wasn't just some woman he had met by chance. She was the daughter of the only person who had ever truly cared about him. And now that he knew the truth, he wasn't sure what to do with it. Because for the first time in his life, Knox Wilder was terrified of losing control. Ivy felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She gripped the edge of Knox's desk, her knuckles white. His words echoed in her mind, each syllable sinking into her like a slow, unbearable weight. "She saved me. That's why you paid the hospital bill." "Yes." Her breath hitched. Her mother hadn't just known Knox. She had been a part of his life. A part of the tragedy that had shaped him into the man standing before her now. Ivy shook her head, stepping back as if putting distance between them would make the truth any less real. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. This doesn't make sense." Knox watched her, his grey eyes unreadable. But there was something raw beneath the surface, something that made her chest tighten even more. "It makes perfect sense," he said softly. "You just don't want to see it." Ivy swallowed hard, fighting against the storm raging inside her. "So what? Our lives have been tangled up in the same mess this whole time, and we just, what? Pretend it doesn't matter?" Knox's jaw tightened. "It doesn't have to define us." "How can it not?" she snapped, her voice rising. "Your mother," she choked on the words. She didn't want to say it. Didn't want to acknowledge the fact that her own mother had been connected to the pain that had destroyed Knox's childhood. That she had been there, in the middle of a story filled with loss and betrayal. "This is too much," she whispered, turning away. Knox exhaled sharply, his hands braced against the desk. "Ivy. I can't do this." The words nearly shattered her as she said them. Everything in her was screaming that it was wrong, that she shouldn't walk away. But how could she stay? How could she look at him and not see the weight of everything that had come before them? Knox was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "I don't want you because of some debt, Ivy." She flinched. "I don't want you because of the past." She turned to face him again, and what she saw in his expression nearly undid her. There was no calculation in his eyes. No cold detachment. Just him. Raw. Unmasked. "I want you because you're you." Ivy's breath hitched. "We don't have to let them decide this for us," Knox continued, stepping closer. "Not my father. Not your mother. Not the past. We get to choose. Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But was love enough to fight against the weight of everything they carried? Knox reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Stay. Ivy stared at him, torn between fear and something even more dangerous, hope. And for the first time, she didn't know what to do. Ivy stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city sprawling beneath her in a sea of golden lights. The night air was crisp, carrying the hum of life below, the distant honking of cars, the chatter of people moving through the streets. Behind her, Knox waited. Silent. Steady. She had spent days, weeks, trying to make sense of everything. Of the past that bound them together. Of the pain that had shaped them both. She had spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was possible to separate herself from the ghosts of their parents. And now, standing here, she finally had her answer. You were right, she murmured, turning to face him. Knox's expression remained unreadable, but his hands curled into fists at his sides, as if bracing for her next words. Ivy took a deep breath. We don't have to let them decide for us. His shoulders relaxed, just barely, but his gaze remained locked on hers. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Ivy exhaled, stepping closer. The past is always going to be there. It's never going to change. But I don't want to keep living in it. She reached for his hand. I want to live now. Knox hesitated for only a second before his fingers laced through hers, his grip warm and firm. For the first time, neither of them felt like they were carrying the weight of their history alone. This wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about choosing to move forward. Together. Knox exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. You're impossible, Ivy Quinn. She smirked. You like it? His fingers tightened around hers. I do. And just like that, the past no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a lesson. A reminder that even in the aftermath of tragedy, there could still be something beautiful. A new beginning. Margaret Quinn sat on the small balcony of her apartment, a warm cup of tea cradled between her hands. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange. For the first time in decades, she felt light. The weight of the past, the guilt, the regret, the what ifs, had been a shadow over her for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it pressing against her chest. But now, she watched as Knox Wilder, the boy she had once held in her arms, the child she had fought for but ultimately lost, stood in front of her, very much a man. A strong, composed, successful man. But more than that. He was free. For years, she had worried that the pain of his past would consume him, that he would become nothing more than a reflection of his father's mistakes. But looking at him now, standing beside Ivy, she knew. Knox had broken the cycle. Margaret set her cup down and reached for his hand. You did it, Miho, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Knox's fingers curled around hers, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had gone unsaid between them. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you, he admitted, his voice low, honest. Margaret's throat tightened. She had spent years wondering if she had done enough. If she could have fought harder. If she had failed him. But now, as she looked into the eyes of the man he had become, she realized something. She hadn't saved him back then. But she had given him something to hold on to. And sometimes, that was enough. She exhaled slowly, squeezing his hand. I forgive myself, she murmured. And I forgive the past. A single tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time, it wasn't from grief. It was from peace. Ivy stood at the doorway, watching as her mother and Knox shared a quiet moment. She had spent so much time fearing that their pasts would always define them, that they would never be able to outrun the shadows of the people who had come before them. But she had been wrong. She turned to Knox when he finally walked toward her, slipping his hand into hers with an ease that made her heart ache in the best way. "Ready?" he asked. Ivy glanced back at her mother one last time, at the peace in her eyes, at the weight that had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Then she looked at Knox. "Yeah," she said, smiling softly. "Let's go." And as they walked out together, hand in hand, she knew. They weren't running from the past anymore. They were writing their own story. Sometimes, even the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes, bringing the right people together in ways no one could have ever predicted. The past leaves its mark on all of us. It carries wounds, regrets, and echoes of things we wish had been different. But it does not define who we are. Knox and Ivy were born from a history of betrayal, loss, and pain, stories written by the generations before them. They could have let those stories dictate their futures, could have let resentment and guilt shape the rest of their lives. But instead, they chose something different. They chose healing. They chose forgiveness. They chose each other. Because in the end, the only way forward is to let go, not to forget, not to erase, but to accept that the past is only one chapter in a much larger story. And the rest? That's up to us. Sometimes, a single act of kindness can change a life forever. Sometimes, love is not about escaping the past, but about facing it together.